A bobcat sneaks into a house and lounges in a baby's crib, but then came the real shock. What looked like a freak accident is only the beginning of something far more dangerous. A young mother, already fighting to keep her child safe, suddenly finds her world turned upside down. Because the animal in the crib isn't the only predator near her home. Behind closed doors, a darker truth is waiting, one that could cost her everything. As fear turns to courage, she faces a choice that will push her past every limit. But can she protect her baby when the danger doesn't just come on for legs, but two? And when the truth finally claws its way out, will she survive long enough to see it? Before we start, take a moment to comment your name or city. It's my way of remembering that behind each play is a real heartbeat. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of Harriet Colburn's modest Prescott home. She had just finished folding laundry downstairs, taking comfort in the simple routine that helped keep her mind occupied since becoming a widow. The house felt too quiet sometimes, save for her infant daughter's gentle coos from upstairs. As she placed the last of the towels in the linen closet, an unusual sound caught her attention. A sort of low, rumbling noise she'd never heard before drifted down from the second floor. Her heart skipped a beat as maternal instinct kicked in. Something wasn't right. "Hello," Harriet called out softly, though she knew there shouldn't be anyone else in the house. Her footsteps seemed too loud as she climbed the wooden stairs, each creak making her more anxious. The nursery door stood slightly ajar, just as she'd left it when putting her baby down for her afternoon nap. But now there was something else, a strange scratching sound coming from inside. Harriet's hands trembled as she slowly pushed the door open. The sight before her made her blood run cold. There, sprawled inside her daughter's white wooden crib, was a full-grown bobcat. The wild predator lay curled beside her sleeping infant, its tawny spotted fur a stark contrast against the pink bedding. The cat's yellow eyes met hers, and Harriet felt her chest constrict in pure terror. Her baby slept peacefully, completely unaware of the deadly danger inches away. Harriet's mind raced frantically. She knew any sudden movement could startle the bobcat into attacking. Her maternal instinct screamed at her to rush in and snatch her child. But her racing thoughts told her that would be the worst thing she could do. Think. She urged herself, trying to control her panicked breathing. Then she remembered. There was raw chicken in the kitchen she'd been thawing for dinner. If she could just. Moving with agonizing slowness, Harriet backed away from the doorway. Her legs felt like jelly as she crept down the stairs, expecting to hear sounds of disturbance from the nursery at any moment. The silence was both a blessing and tortured. In the kitchen, her shaking hands fumbled with the refrigerator door. She grabbed the package of raw chicken, her fingers leaving smears on the plastic wrapper. The meat was still cold and slick as she unwrapped it. Harriet climbed the stairs again, this time with purpose despite her terror. She held the raw chicken out in front of her like a shield as she approached the nursery. The bobcat's head lifted, its nostrils flaring at the scent of meat. "Come on," Harriet whispered, her voice barely audible. "Come this way." She took a step backward, then another. The bobcat rose slowly, its powerful shoulders rippling as it stood. Harriet's heart threatened to burst from her chest as the predator gracefully leaped from the crib, landing silently on the nursery floor. Step by careful step, Harriet led the bobcat out of the nursery, down the hallway, and toward the stairs. Her baby remained asleep, and Harriet said a silent prayer of thanks. The bobcat followed the scent of meat, its eyes never leaving the prize in her hands. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, Harriet's trembling legs nearly gave out, but she pressed on, making her way to the back door. With one hand, she managed to turn the handle and push it open, still holding the chicken out in front of her. Once outside, she tossed the meat as far as she could into the yard. The bobcat bounded after it, and Harriet slammed the door shut, fumbling with the lock. Her legs finally did give out then, and she slid down against the door, sobbing with relief. It took several minutes before she could stand again. Her first instinct was to run upstairs and grab her baby, but she forced herself to be methodical. With trembling fingers, she dialed animal control, her voice shaking as she reported what had happened. There was a bobcat in my house," she managed to say, her free hand pressed against her racing heart. "It was in my baby's crib. I got it out. But please, someone needs to come check the area." Only after she hung up did Harriet allow herself to rush upstairs to the nursery. Her daughter was just beginning to stir, making small, wakeful sounds. Harriet scooped her up, holding her close, breathing in her sweet baby scent as tears streamed down her face. "It's okay, baby girl," she whispered, though the words were more for herself than her infant daughter. "Mama's got you. You're safe now." She sank into the rocking chair, cradling her precious child, her body still trembling from the encounter. Through the window, she could see animal control arriving, their truck pulling up to her house. But Harriet couldn't bring herself to move just yet. She needed this moment to hold her baby and process how close they'd come to disaster. The whole incident had lasted less than 15 minutes, but to Harriet, it felt like hours had passed. She knew she would need to speak with the animal control officers soon, but for now, she just rocked her daughter, grateful beyond words for her quick thinking and the miracle of her child's safety. Within 30 minutes of Harriet's call, a white animal control truck pulled up outside her home. The fading sunlight glinted off its official markings as two officers, one tall and lean, the other shorter with graying temples, made their way up her front path. Mrs. Colburn, the taller officer, asked, adjusting his cap. I'm Officer Martinez, and this is Officer Chen. You reported a bobcat in your home? Harriet nodded, her hands still trembling slightly as she led them inside. Yes, in my daughter's nursery. I managed to lure it out to the backyard with some meat. It's still there, under the old oak tree. Officer Chen's weathered face creased. With concern. You did the right thing, ma'am. Lucky you kept your cool. We've been getting similar calls all week. This caught Harriet's attention. Similar calls. You mean other bobcats? All through the neighborhoods bordering the Lansing estate, Martinez confirmed, his voice dropping slightly. Fifth one this week. Always in homes with young children. Harriet wrapped her arms around herself. The evening chill suddenly more noticeable. Richard Lansing, the man who owns all that land up north. The very same, Chen said, heading toward the back door. His hunting preserve backs up to half the residential areas in town. The officers worked efficiently, using specialized equipment to safely capture the bobcat. As they prepared to load it into their truck, Officer Martinez lingered behind Mrs. Colburn. He said quietly, glancing around as if checking they weren't being overheard. I'd recommend getting some better locks for your windows. And maybe a security system. But why would I just... Be careful, he interrupted. And if anyone offers to help with your animal problem, you might want to think twice about accepting. Before Harriet could press him for more information, he was already walking away, leaving her standing in her doorway with more questions than answers. She spent that night checking the locks repeatedly. Her daughter Lucy sleeping peacefully in her own room while Harriet kept vigil. The next morning brought sharp knocks at her front door. Through the peephole, Harriet saw two men in expensive-looking suits that seemed out of place in their rural setting. With trembling fingers, she opened the door just enough to speak through the security chain. Mrs. Colburn, the taller of the two men, smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We represent Mr. Lansing's private wildlife management service. We heard about your unfortunate encounter yesterday. Harriet's throat went dry. How did you hear about that? Word travels fast in a small town, the second man said smoothly. Mr. Lansing wants to offer his personal assistance in preventing any future incidents. Our private removal service is very discreet. The emphasis he placed on discreet made Harriet's skin crawl. She remembered Officer Martinez's warning from the previous night. That's very kind, she managed. But animal control has already handled the situation. The first man's smile tightened. Mrs. Colburn, we strongly recommend you consider our offer. These situations can be complicated. It would be a shame if something happened to your little one because you weren't properly protected. The threat, though veiled, was unmistakable. Harriet's hand gripped the doorframe tighter. I'll think about it, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. See that you do. They left her with a business card, their polished shoes crunching on her gravel path as they retreated to a black SUV with tinted windows. Harriet closed the door and slid down against it, her heart pounding. The bobcat hadn't been a random occurrence. Someone was orchestrating these incidents, using wild animals to terrorize the neighborhood, and now that she'd refused their help, she feared she'd made herself a target. Lucy's soft coos from the baby monitor drew her back to reality. Harriet pushed herself up, her fear giving way to determination. She wasn't just protecting herself anymore. She had her daughter to think about. Whatever game Lansing and his men were playing, they had picked the wrong mother to intimidate. She walked to her kitchen window, watching the black SUV disappear down her street. The business card they'd left felt heavy in her hand. Everything Officer Martinez had hinted at suddenly made terrible sense. This wasn't just about wild animals straying into town. This was about power, control, and the kind of man who would use fear to maintain both. The animal control officers had barely driven away when Harriet found herself unable to stop shaking. The house felt different now. Every creak and shadow made her jump. Her baby's soft coos from the nursery usually brought her joy, but now they filled her with fresh waves of terror as the image of the bobcat in the crib played over and over. In her mind, she needed to talk to someone who could help make sense of this. With trembling fingers, she picked up the telephone and called the sheriff's office. Deputy Elias Boone arrived 20 minutes later, his tall frame casting a long shadow across her porch. In the fading daylight, the scar along his jaw seemed more pronounced in the dim light, matching the weariness in his eyes. "Mrs. Colburn," he said, removing his hat. "You said this was about the Bobcat incident." Harriet invited him in, wringing her hands as she led him to the kitchen. "It's not just about the Bobcat anymore, Deputy. Something isn't right here." She told him everything. The animal control officer's comments about similar incidents near Lansing's property, and the unexpected visit from Lansing's men. They said they offered private animal removal services, she explained, her voice growing stronger with each word. But the way they said it, it felt more like a warning to keep quiet. Elias listened, his expression guarded. She could see the doubt in his eyes, the same look she had seen too often since becoming a widow. People assuming she was just being paranoid or emotional. Double quotes Mrs. Colburn, he said carefully. "Richard Lansing is a prominent citizen. These are serious implications." "I know what I heard," Harriet insisted, straightening her spine. "And I know what I saw in my baby's crib today. Something is wrong here, Deputy Boone." From upstairs, her daughter began to cry. Harriet excused herself and rushed to the nursery, lifting the baby into her arms. When she returned downstairs, Elias was standing by the window, his posture tense. "I've been a lawman for 15 years, he said quietly, still looking out the window. "Made my share of mistakes, sometimes seeing something wrong and not acting." He turned to face her, his eyes haunted. "It stays with you. Then help me understand." "What's happening?" Harriet pleaded. "I can look into it," he said slowly. "But Mrs. Colburn, if there is something going on, digging into it could be dangerous, especially for a woman alone with a child." Later that evening, Harriet walked the short distance to her sister-in-law's house. Nora Finch had always been practical and steady, exactly what Harriet needed right now. Nora listened intently as Harriet recounted the day's events, her hands busy kneading bread dough, but her attention fully focused. When Harriet finished, Nora wiped her hands on her apron and looked her sister-in-law straight in the eye. "Those men trying to scare you into silence?" Nora said firmly. "That's exactly why you can't stay quiet. But what if Deputy Boone is right? What if looking into this puts us in danger?" Nora's expression softened. "Being a widow doesn't mean you stop being brave, Harriet. Your Thomas would have wanted you to stand up for what's right." Harriet's eyes welled with tears at the mention of her late husband. "I'm not brave like he was. You faced down a wild bobcat to protect your baby," Nora reminded her. "That's plenty brave in my book." As Harriet walked home in the growing darkness, her sister-in-law's words echoed in her mind. The street was quiet, but she could see lights on in neighboring houses, families settling in for the evening. How many of them had experienced similar incidents? How many had been frightened into silence? Back home, she stood in the nursery doorway, watching her daughter sleep peacefully. The image of the bobcat still haunted her, but now it stirred something else inside her. Not just fear, but determination. Whatever Lansing was hiding, whatever game he was playing with people's safety, she couldn't just look the other way early. The next morning, Harriet walked to the sheriff's office. Deputy Boone was at his desk, and she could see the moment he recognized her purposeful stride. "I know you warned me about the dangers," she said before he could speak, "but I can't just pretend this didn't happen. Not when other families might be at risk too." Elias stood, his expression torn between concern and something that might have been respect. "Mrs. Colburn, I'm not asking you to believe me without proof," she continued. "I'm just asking for your help in finding the truth." The deputy was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those weary eyes. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "But we do this carefully. And at the first sign of real danger, you step back. Deal?" Harriet took a deep breath, knowing this moment would change everything. Deal. The moon cast long shadows across Lansing's property as Harriet and Elias crouched behind a weathered fence post. Her heart pounded so hard she worried the sound might give them away. The night air was crisp and cold against her face, carrying the unmistakable scent of pine needles. And something else, something wild. "We shouldn't be here," Elias whispered, his face tight with concern. The scar on his jaw seemed more pronounced in the silvery moonlight. "If Lansing's men catch us, we need proof," Harriet whispered back, gripping her camera tightly. "No one will believe us without it." They slipped through a gap in the fence, moving as quietly as possible through the underbrush. The preserve stretched out before them, a maze of shadows and trees. Every snap of a twig made Harriet's breath catch in her throat. After 15 minutes of careful navigation, they found what they were looking for. Row after row of metal cages lined a clearing, each one containing a different predator. Wolves paced restlessly, their ribs showing through matted fur. Bobcats lay listlessly in their small prisons, barely lifting their heads at the intruder's approach. In the largest cages, mountain lions watched them with hungry eyes. Dear God, Elias breathed, his hand instinctively moving to his holstered weapon. They're starving them. Harriet's hands shook as she raised her camera. The flash was off, but even in the dim light, she could capture the horror before them. Click after click, she documented the illegal menagerie. These weren't animals being preserved, they were being tortured, kept hungry and aggressive for Lansing's wealthy clients to hunt. A twig snapped behind them. Well, a gruff voice called out. Look what we caught ourselves. Harriet spun around to see 3 of Lansing's men emerging from the trees, each carrying a rifle. The moonlight glinted off their weapons as they raised them. Run, Elias shouted. Drawing his service weapon, they burst into the dense pines branches, whipping at their faces as they fled. Gunshots cracked through the night air, splintering bark near Harriet's head. She clutched the camera to her chest, knowing it contained the only evidence of Lansing's cruelty. The forest floor was treacherous in the dark. Roots and rocks threatened to trip them with every step. Harriet's lungs burned as she ran, following Elias's shadowy form ahead of her. The sounds of pursuit grew closer. Their hunters knew these woods far better than they did. Suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath Harriet's feet. She skidded to a stop at the edge of a steep cliff, loose rocks tumbling into the darkness. Below, she teetered on the edge, arms windmilling desperately. Harriet, Elias lunged for her, grabbing her arm just as she started to fall. The camera swung wildly from its strap around her neck as he pulled her back from the precipice. The heavy footfalls of their pursuers grew louder. They were trapped between the cliff and Lansing's armed men. Harriet's heart nearly stopped as flashlight beams cut through the darkness toward them. Then from somewhere in the woods came a bone-chilling screech. A blur of tawny fur launched itself from a nearby tree, landing between them and their pursuers. A full-grown bobcat, lean and fierce, faced down Lansing's men with bared teeth and raised hackles. The distraction was all they needed. Elias pulled Harriet along a narrow trail that skirted the cliff edge. Behind them, shouts and another screech echoed through the trees. But they didn't stop to look back. They ran until their legs threatened to give out, until the sounds of pursuit faded into the night. When they finally stopped, hidden in a dense thicket, Harriet's whole body trembled. She clutched the camera like a lifeline, knowing the images it contained could bring down Lansing's entire operation. Elias kept his gun drawn, scanning the darkness around them as they caught their breath. Are you all right? He asked softly, his free hand gentle on her shoulder. Harriet nodded, unable to speak just yet. The night's events played through her mind. In terrifying flashes, the caged animals, the armed men, the cliff, the wild bobcat that had saved them. She'd known exposing Lansing would be dangerous, but now she understood just how far he would go to protect his cruel enterprise. They waited in silence until they were certain no one followed, then began the long trek back to safety. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every rustle of leaves made them freeze. But somehow, they made it off Lansing's property without further incident, carrying with them the evidence that would expose his dark secret to the world. The morning, after their harrowing escape from Lansing's property, Harriet sat at her kitchen table, her hands still trembling slightly as she cradled a warm cup of coffee. Her baby daughter slept peacefully in the next room, blissfully unaware of the dangerous adventure her mother had undertaken the night before. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting gentle shadows across the worn wooden table where photographs from last night lay, scattered damning evidence of the horrors they'd witnessed. The sharp ring of her telephone made her jump, sloshing coffee onto her hand. She quickly wiped it away and answered, relieved to hear the familiar voice of Marcus Weber from Animal Control. Mrs. Colburn? I need to talk to you about something important, Marcus said, his voice tight with concern. Can you meet me at the coffee shop on Pine Street? It's about the bobcat we removed from your home. Harriet glanced at her sleeping baby through the doorway. Give me 30 minutes to arrange for a sitter. At the coffee shop, Marcus sat in a corner booth, his Animal Control uniform wrinkled from what looked like a long shift. His usually cheerful face was drawn with worry as Harriet slid into the seat across from him. What I'm about to tell you could cost me my job, he said in a low voice, leaning forward. But after what happened to you and your baby, you deserve to know the truth. Harriet's heart quickened. What truth? Marcus pulled out a medical report and slid it across the table. We examined the bobcat we took from your house. It had been declawed, every single claw surgically removed. It's an illegal practice, Mrs. Colburn, and a cruel one, like cutting off a person's fingers at the first knuckle. Harriet's hand flew to her mouth as she remembered the desperate creature in her baby's crib. But why would anyone? Because declawed cats can't defend themselves in the wild. Marcus explained, his voice thick with disgust. They can't hunt properly. They're forced to seek easy prey, to enter human spaces they normally avoid. And we've traced similar cases, all declawed predators, to areas surrounding Lansing's property. The realization hit Harriet like a physical blow. The Bobcat hadn't been a monster stalking her child, that had been a mutilated victim, desperate and starving. Her fear transformed into something else, a burning anger that made her hands clench into fist. There's more, Marcus continued, glancing nervously round the nearly empty cafe. We've found other declawed predators, wolves, mountain lions, all showing signs of captivity. But every time we try to investigate, Lansing's lawyers shut us down. He claims it's all part of his legal hunting preserve operations. Harriet thought of the cages they discovered last night, the frightened and hungry animals trapped inside. It's not legal, she said firmly. What he's doing, it's torture. Marcus nodded grimly. The decline is just the beginning. He's creating helpless targets for his wealthy clients to hunt. And when these animals escape, they're forced into residential areas, terrifying families like yours. Then his security team swoops in, offering protection services for a price. The pieces clicked into place in Harriet's mind. Lansing wasn't just cruel to animals. He was manipulating an entire community through fear. The thought of her baby sharing a crib with that desperate creature still made her shudder. But now she understood they were all victims of Lansing's greed. I have evidence, Harriet said quietly, thinking of the photographs hidden safely at home. Deputy Boone and we saw the cages, the conditions. We have proof. Marcus's eyes widened. Be careful, Mrs. Colburn. Lansing's influence runs deep in this town. People who've tried to expose him before. He trailed off meaningfully. But Harriet felt something shifting inside her, fear giving way to determination. She thought of her late husband, who had always taught her that standing up for what was right mattered more than standing down in fear. She thought of her baby daughter, and the world she wanted her to grow up in, one where neither animals nor humans were exploited for profit. I won't be quiet, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. Not anymore. That bobcat in my nursery, it could have hurt my baby, yes. But the real monster isn't the animal. It's the man who mutilated it and forced it into my home. Marcus reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Whatever you decide to do, be smart about it. Lansing's men are watching, but you're not alone in this fight. As Harriet left the coffee shop, her steps were steady and purposeful. The terror of finding a predator in her baby's crib had nearly broken her. But now, understanding the truth, that fear had crystallized into something stronger, a determination to expose Lansing's cruelty and protect both the vulnerable animals and the families he terrorized. She looked up at the mountains rising beyond the town, where somewhere among the pines, caged and declawed creatures suffered in silence. No more. She whispered to herself. No more victims. Not on my watch. The morning sunlight streamed through Harriet's kitchen window as she spread out her late husband's worn leather journal on the table. Her fingers traced the detailed maps and notes he'd made about animal migration patterns in the area. Beside the journal lay the disturbing photos from Lansing's property, showing rows of cages and suffering animals. These supply routes make sense, Elias said, leaning over her shoulder to study the journal. His presence was steady and reassuring, despite the shadows under his eyes from their close call the night before. Your husband knew these mountains better than anyone. Harriet nodded, fighting back the familiar ache that came with handling Thomas's belongings. He tracked every predator movement for 15 years. If Lansing's men are capturing animals, they'll use these same paths from the next room. Nora's gentle voice carried as she sang a lullaby to Harriet's daughter. The baby's occasional happy gurgle brought a smile to Harriet's tired face. Having Nora's support meant everything. Without her sister-in-law's help watching the baby, none of this would be possible. Here and here. Harriet pointed to specific locations marked in Thomas's precise handwriting. These ravines are natural corridors for bobcats and mountain lions. Lansing's men must be setting their traps along these routes. Elias pulled up a chair, his badge catching the morning light. We'll need more than just photos. Lansing's got friends in high places. We need dates, times, witnesses, everything documented. I've been thinking about that. Harriet retrieved a small notebook from her apron pocket. I've started recording every strange animal incident reported in town. There's a pattern forming. They all happen within 2 days of new animals arriving. At Lansing's compound, their planning was interrupted by Nora entering the kitchen. The baby nestled against her shoulder. She's finally down for her morning nap, Nora said, her practical nature showing in her direct gaze. Which means you'd have about 2 hours to do what needs doing. Harriet reached for her daughter, pressing a soft kiss to her downy head before Nora settled into the rocking chair by the window. The trust between the two women was unspoken, but absolute. Nora would guard the child with her life. While Harriet fought for justice, over the next several hours, they mapped out a strategy. Harriet's knowledge of her husband's tracking methods, combined with Elias's law enforcement experience, created a solid foundation. They identified 3 main routes Lansing's men used to transport captured animals, and plotted observation points where they could gather evidence without being spotted. But their careful planning was interrupted by an unexpected visit. Through the kitchen window, Harriet spotted 2 of Lansing's men approaching her front gate. Their polished boots and too neat appearance couldn't hide their predatory nature. "Quick," she whispered, gathering the maps and photos. "Out the back door." Elias slipped out while Nora hurried upstairs with the baby. Harriet had just hidden the last of their evidence when a heavy knock echoed through the house. Opening the door, she found herself face to face with Lansing's enforcers. The taller one smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Colburn, Mr. Lansing noticed some disturbances near his property last night. He's concerned about trespassers." "How unfortunate," Harriet replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I hope nothing was damaged." "Not yet," the second man said, his threat barely veiled. "Mr. Lansing just wanted to remind local residents that his land is private. Accidents can happen to people who don't respect boundaries." Harriet stood straighter, channeling her fear into determination. "Thank you for the warning. I'll be sure to spread the word about Mr. Lansing's concerns." After they left, Harriet pressed her forehead against the closed door, taking deep breaths. The encounter only strengthened her resolve. Her grief over Thomas had left her feeling helpless for so long. But now that same loss was becoming her strength. He had taught her everything she needed to know about tracking and survival, and she would use those skills to expose Lansing's cruelty. When Elias returned through the back door, his face was grim. "They're watching your house. Then we'll have to be smarter than them," Harriet said, retrieving their hidden evidence. Thomas always said the best trackers are the ones who leave no trace themselves. Together, they refined their plan, adding layers of precaution. They would document everything: photos, videos, witness statements from other affected families. Nora would continue providing their cover story, making it appear Harriet was nothing more than a grieving widow focused on her child. But as they worked, Harriet couldn't shake the chill from Lansing's men's visit. The stakes were rising, and Lansing's subtle threats were becoming more overt. She looked at her baby daughter, peaceful in Nora's arms, and knew there would be no backing down. The same protective instinct that had helped her save her child from the Bobcat now drove her to fight against the true predator, Lansing himself. Harriet's hands trembled as she studied the crumpled paper through her binoculars. The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned barn where Lansing's latest auction was set to take place. From their hidden position in the brush, she and Elias watched expensive cars roll up the dirt road. "There he is," Elias whispered, pointing to a black SUV. Richard Lansing stepped out, adjusting his tailored suit with practiced precision. His cold eyes surveyed the property as his men directed wealthy buyers inside. "I count 6 vehicles," Harriet murmured, "all with out-of-state plates." Her stomach churned as she watched caged animals being unloaded from a truck, wolves, and mountain lions destined for private hunting grounds. "We'll document everything," Elias assured her, checking his camera, "then take it straight to the state wildlife authorities." But something felt wrong. The setup seemed too exposed, too obvious. Harriet's instinct screamed danger, honed by weeks of tracking Lansing's operations. "This doesn't feel right," she said. Elias nodded grimly. "Stay alert." Harriet's phone buzzed. Nora's name flashed on the screen. Her sister-in-law was watching the baby while they conducted surveillance. Harriet's heart stopped when she heard Nora's terrified voice. "They're here," Nora whispered frantically. "Lansing's men. They broke in. I'm hiding in the closet with the baby, but they're searching." The line went dead. "No." Harriet scrambled to her feet. "They're at my house. They have my baby." Elias grabbed her arm as she started to run. "Wait, this was his plan. He knew we'd be here. We need to be smart about this. That's my daughter." Harriet wrenched away, panic clawing at her chest. But Elias held firm. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "If we rush him without thinking, we'll make it worse. Let me call for backup." Tears streamed down Harriet's face as she forced herself to stop. Every fiber of her being screamed to run to her child, but she knew Elias was right. They needed help. Within minutes, they were racing back to town in Elias's patrol car, lights flashing. But when they reached Harriet's house, they found Nora unconscious on the floor and the nursery empty. A note lay in the crib: "End your investigation, or you'll never see her again." Harriet's knees buckled. The room spun as her worst nightmare became reality. She clutched the bars of the empty crib, remembering the Bobcat she'd found there weeks ago. Now her baby was gone, taken by men far more dangerous than any wild animal. I'll get her back, Elias promised, his voice hard with determination. We'll find her, Harriet, I swear it. But Harriet barely heard him. All she could think about was her tiny daughter in the hands of cruel men. Had her crusade against Lansing's operation put her baby in danger? Should she have stayed quiet? Look the other way like everyone else? No. The thought came with surprising clarity through her fear. Lansing was counting on her maternal terror to silence her. He'd used her baby as a weapon, just as he'd used those trapped animals to intimidate the town. We need a plan, she said, straightening up. Though her voice shook, steel had entered her spine. He'll expect me to back down, to give up everything we've uncovered. Elias studied her face. You're not going to, are you? No. Harriet wiped her eyes. But I am going to get my daughter back. And then I'm going to destroy him. They gathered in Elias's office, spreading out maps and photos of Lansing's properties. Nora joined them after being checked by paramedics, her head bandaged but her spirit unbroken. The auction was a diversion, Elias said, marking locations. He wanted us watching that while his men came here. But he'll need somewhere secure to hold the baby, somewhere private but accessible. Harriet traced the routes they discovered while tracking animal shipments. Here, she pointed to an isolated cabin. It's close enough to town for supplies, but remote enough to hide a kidnapped child. And his men use it as a way station for their illegal captures. It'll be heavily guarded, Elias warned. We'll need to be careful. Strategic. I don't care how many men he has, Harriet said. That's my baby. And I'm getting her back. They began planning their approach, marking escape routes, and coordinating with trusted officers. Each minute felt like an eternity to Harriet, but she forced herself to focus. Her daughter needed her to be smart, not just desperate. Lansing thinks he can control me through fear, she said, checking her watch. But he doesn't understand. A mother's love is stronger than fear, and I won't stop until my baby is safe and his cruelty is exposed. Elias touched her shoulder gently. We move at nightfall. Are you ready? Harriet nodded, her heart pounding, but her mind clear. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. The night air crackled with tension as Harriet and Elias crouched behind dense bushes at the edge of Lansing's compound. Security lights cast harsh shadows across the grounds where wealthy buyers mingled, examining cages of captured predators. Harriet's heart hammered against her ribs as she spotted armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Remember the plan, Elias whispered, checking his service weapon. We wait for my signal. Then a sudden commotion erupted near the main building. Several buyers were arguing with Lansing's men, creating a distraction. Elias nodded. Now, they sprinted from cover, using the darkness between floodlights to their advantage. Harriet's eyes darted everywhere, searching for any sign of her baby. The compound was larger than she remembered, filled with the low growls of caged animals, and the shouts of men dotting alarm blared. Someone had spotted them. Gunshots cracked through the night air, sending buyers scrambling for their vehicles. Elias shoved Harriet behind a stack of empty cages as bullets pinged off metal. Go, he shouted, returning fire at approaching guards. Find your daughter. I'll hold them off. Harriet ran, ducking between buildings. Her mother's instinct pulled her toward a small cabin where she'd seen movement. As she rounded the corner, a massive crash stopped her in her tracks. One of the larger transport cages had broken open in the chaos, and a full-grown mountain lion burst free. The cat's presence sent waves of panic through the compound. Guards abandoned their post, racing for safety as the predator bounded through the grounds. Harriet used the confusion to her advantage, pressing forward while everyone else fled. A cry cut through the chaos, a baby's wail. Her baby's wail. Harriet's head snapped toward the sound, spotting one of Lansing's men hurrying toward a waiting truck, clutching a small bundle. No. The word tore from her throat as she sprinted after them. The guard turned, reaching for his weapon, but the released cougar chose that moment to leap onto a nearby fence. The man stumbled. Startled by the wild animal's proximity, Harriet didn't hesitate. She charged forward. Her focus narrowed to her child's crying face. The guard recovered, raising his gun. But Harriet was already there. She slammed into him with all her strength, wrapping her arms around her daughter as they both went down. They rolled across rough gravel, Harriet curling her body around her baby to protect her. The guard's gun skittered away as he scrambled to his feet, but before he could reach for it, Elias appeared, tackling him to the ground. Harriet, run, Elias shouted as he grappled with the larger man. The larger man. She clutched her crying daughter close, checking quickly for injuries. Relief flooded through her when she found none. But they weren't safe yet. The compound had descended into complete chaos. The escaped cougar prowled between vehicles, sending buyers and guards alike scrambling for cover. Gunshots still echoed through the night. Harriet spotted a clear path to the perimeter fence. She ran, her baby pressed against her chest, her heart pounding in time with her footsteps. Behind her, she heard the sounds of fighting as Elias held off their pursuers. A guard stepped into her path, but the cougars were sent him diving for safety. Harriet vaulted over a fallen cage, her muscles burning with effort. She was almost to the fence when she heard Lansing's voice. "Stop her," he bellowed. "Don't let them escape." More shots rang out. Harriet dropped and rolled behind a parked truck, shielding her daughter with her body. The baby's cries had softened to whimpers, tiny hands clutching at Harriet's shirt. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "Mama's got you. Mama's got you now." Through the chaos, she heard Elias shouting orders. He managed to call for backup, and police sirens wailed in the distance. The sound sent Lansing's remaining men scattering into the darkness. Harriet seized her chance. She sprinted the final distance to the fence, finding the gap they'd scouted earlier. With trembling hands, she passed her precious bundle through first, then squeezed through herself. Behind her, the compound erupted in fresh shouts as police vehicles flooded the grounds. She didn't stop running until she reached the predetermined meeting point where Nora waited in a car. Only then, as she collapsed into the back seat with her daughter safe in her arms, did Harriet allow herself to break down. Tears streamed down her face as she held her baby close, breathing in her sweet, familiar scent. "You're safe now," she murmured, rocking gently. "You're safe. I've got you. I'll always come for you." Through the windshield, they watched as police lights painted the night in red and blue. The sounds of conflict gradually died away, replaced by the organized commands of law enforcement taking control of the scene. Somewhere in that chaos, the cougars still roamed free, a fitting symbol of the wild justice that had helped Harriet reclaim her child. Harriet's heart pounded as she gripped the steering wheel of the old pickup truck, her knuckles white with determination. Through the windshield, she could see the rows of metal cages glinting in the morning sun, each one holding a desperate creature that Lansing had turned into a commodity. The sounds of gunfire and shouting echoed across the compound, mixing with the growls and cries of the trapped animals. "Hold on, sweetie," she whispered to her baby, safely tucked away with Nora in a hidden spot far from the chaos. Now she could focus on ending this nightmare once and for all. Without hesitation, Harriet pressed her foot hard on the gas pedal. The truck's engine roared as she aimed straight for the line of cages. The impact sent shock waves through her body as metal crashed against metal. Cages tumbled and broke open, their doors flying off their hinges. One by one, the imprisoned animals found their freedom. A massive cougar leaped from its broken prison, its muscles rippling as it landed gracefully on the ground. Wolves slipped from their cages like shadows, their yellow eyes gleaming with newfound freedom. Bobcats darted between the chaos, silent and quick. The very creatures Lansing had tried to control were now loose on his own property. "No, stop her." Lansing's voice cracked with panic as he emerged from behind a stack of crates. His usually perfect suit was dirty and torn, his face red with rage and fear. But his commands fell on deaf ears as his men scattered, more concerned with saving themselves from the freed predators than following his orders. Elias appeared from the other side of the compound, his badge catching the sunlight as he moved. "With purpose, it's over, Lansing," he shouted, his gun steady in his hands. "Your operation ends today." Lansing spun around, searching for an escape route, but found himself surrounded by the very animals he had imprisoned. A wolf stalked closer, its teeth bared in a snarl. The land baron's face turned pale as he backed away, stumbling over the uneven ground. Harriet climbed out of the truck's cab, her legs shaky but her spirit strong. She watched as Lansing, the man who had threatened her family and terrorized these animals, lost all his power in mere moments. He tried to run, but Elias was faster, tackling him to the ground with practiced skill. "You're under arrest," Elias said firmly, securing handcuffs around Lansing's wrist. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as police cars and animal control vehicles swarmed the compound. The authorities had finally arrived, drawn by the commotion and Elias's earlier alert. Harriet didn't wait to watch Lansing being led away. She ran to where Nora waited with her baby, her arms aching to hold her child. When she finally reached them, she pulled her daughter close, breathing in her sweet baby smell. Tears of relief rolled down her cheeks as she realized it was truly over. "You did it," Nora whispered, squeezing her shoulder. "You really did it." Elias joined them, his face showing both exhaustion and pride. "Animal control is already working on safely containing and relocating the animals," he explained. "They'll be taken to proper sanctuaries this time. No more private hunting preserves." Harriet looked around at the chaos she had created, the smashed cages, the scattered equipment, the proof of Lansing's cruel enterprise exposed for all to see. Her body ached from the truck's impact, and her hands still trembled from the adrenaline. But she felt stronger than ever before. I couldn't let him win, she said softly, rocking her baby gently. Not after everything he did. These animals deserved better, and so did we. As the morning sun rose higher in the sky, Harriet watched the authorities documenting the scene and leading away Lansing's men in handcuffs. She had faced both the cruelty of wild animals and the darker nature of men, and she had emerged victorious. Her quiet life as a widow had transformed into something she never expected. A fight for justice that she had won through sheer determination and courage. The baby cooed in her arms, reaching up to touch her mother's face with tiny fingers. Harriet smiled, knowing that her daughter would grow up in a safer world. One where people like Lansing couldn't prey on the vulnerable, whether human or animal. She had proven that even in the darkest moments, one person's bravery could make all the difference. The early morning sun painted Prescott streets in soft golden light as Harriet Colburn drove home, her baby sleeping peacefully in the car seat. Beside her, sheriff's vehicles escorted Richard Lansing away in handcuffs, his empire of cruelty finally crumbling. The image of the wealthy man's shocked face, surrounded by the very predators he had exploited, would stay with her forever. Elias Boone's truck followed close behind as they approached her modest house. The familiar white porch and blue shutters looked different now, no longer a reminder of loss and loneliness, but a symbol of hard-won victory. Harriet's hands trembled slightly as she lifted her daughter from the car seat, not from fear this time, but from sheer exhaustion and relief. "Let me help you with that," Elias said softly, reaching for her bag as she climbed the porch steps. The scar on his jaw caught the morning light, but his eyes held a new brightness that erased the haunted look she'd grown used to seeing. Inside, everything was just as they'd left it during their desperate rush to save her child. A half-empty coffee cup still sat on the kitchen counter. Her daughter's stuffed bear lay forgotten by the stairs. Such ordinary things. Yet they brought tears to Harriet's eyes. "We're home, sweet girl," she whispered to her baby, who stirred and blinked sleepily. "We're really home. Really home." Harriet climbed the stairs slowly, each step carrying the weight of memory. The last time she'd walked this path, terror had gripped her heart at the sound of an intruder. Now, she moved with quiet confidence, Elias's steady presence behind her a reminder that she was no longer alone. The nursery door stood slightly ajar. Harriet paused, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the white crib that had once been the site of her worst nightmare. The sight of the Bobcat curled beside her sleeping baby had nearly stopped her heart that day. Now, she understood that the declawed creature had been as much a victim as they were, driven by Lansing's cruelty into desperate acts. With gentle movements, Harriet laid her daughter in the crib. The baby settled easily, tiny fingers curling around her blanket. Tears flowed freely down Harriet's cheeks as she watched her child sleep, safe and sound where she belonged. "I never thought I'd feel peaceful in this room again," she admitted softly to Elias, who stood in the doorway. "But now it feels right, like we've reclaimed it." Elias stepped closer, his usual reserve softened by something warmer. "You did that, Harriet. You turned fear into strength. Showed us all what real courage looks like." She turned to face him, seeing in his eyes the same man who had pulled her from the cliff's edge, who had fought beside her through darkness and danger. But he was different now too, standing straighter, the burden of his past failures finally lifting from his shoulders. "We did it together," Harriet corrected him. "You stood with me when everyone else thought I was crazy to fight back. Not as your protector," Elias said firmly. "As your partner. That's what I want to be, if you'll have me. A partner in whatever comes next." Harriet's heart swelled at his words. In the months since losing her husband, she'd thought her heart would stay forever locked in grief. But life had other plans, showing her that love could grow even in the hardest places, like wildflowers breaking through stone. "I'd like that," she whispered, reaching for his hand. They stood together by the crib, watching the peaceful rise and fall of the baby's chest. Outside, birds sang in the pine trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage through the window. The world felt new, full of possibility. Harriet thought about her journey from the terrified widow who had found a predator in her babies, crib to the woman who had faced down armed men and freed captured animals. She had discovered reserves of strength she never knew she possessed, driven by love for her child and a deep sense of justice. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I used to think being brave meant not being afraid. But that's not it at all, is it? It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified." Elias squeezed her hand. "That's the truest kind of courage, the kind you showed us all. Together, They walked downstairs, leaving the baby to her peaceful dreams. The morning light filled the kitchen as Harriet started a fresh pot of coffee, such a simple, ordinary task, but it felt like a celebration of normalcy, of safety reclaimed. Through the window, she could see the mountains rising against the Arizona sky, strong and unchanging. Like those mountains, she had weathered storms and emerged stronger. She had proven her worth, not just to others but to herself. Most importantly, she had secured a future where her daughter could grow up safe and loved, surrounded by people who would stand up for what was right. If this story found you at the right moment, subscribe and stay close. Tomorrow's may be the reminder you didn't know you needed.